So today's episode, I'm going to talk about how to fuel your body for long distance endurance events. I'm going to talk about it from a perspective of reasonable long distances, but I think anything over an hour, or anything over 30, 40 minutes, this is still going to be applicable to, okay? So, I'm not a nutrition scientist, right? I'm just going to got a diploma in sports nutrition, which just means fuck all, but I have learnt these things through tried and tested, fuck ups, failures. I've learnt it through things that have worked and things that haven't. So all of this information is, for me personally, has worked really, really well. And I've learned from speaking to a lot of really, really good people on these things. People tend to overcomplicate the shit out of nutrition when it comes to challenges. And I think for everyday people that want to, jump into a marathon or maybe go do their first ultra or do something hard and they want to fuel your body, this is going to be perfect for you, because you don't need to go get a sweat test. You don't need to do all this crazy shit that people do. You just need to understand the fundamentals. And those fundamentals can be pretty much broken down into three things, which is, calories, fueling your body, hydration, and salt. Now we're going to get a little bit more technical than that, but I'm going to run you through like the bare minimums that you need for long endurance events, okay? Now the number one rule of doing a big, physical feat and doing an endurance event when it comes to food is that overfueling barely causes you issues compared to underfueling, right? So if there was a hierarchy of importance from like a pyramid perspective, always fueling your body is number one. Seafood diet, you see food, you feel like it, you eat it. Especially on like a 24-hour event, you fucking eat that food. On a 100K event, you eat that food. On a marathon, you can be a little bit more strategic. You can plan things, but in general, same thing. Eat the food you want to eat, because reality is it's just hard to replace the calories that you're expending, right? Now, if you don't eat well on a challenge or on a physical feat, right, you're going to hit a wall. And unfortunately, that wall itself is pretty hard to actually get over if you haven't fueled properly. Because you can get over things mentally, but if your body's falling to shit, like, good luck, right? So you need to be maintaining correct nutrition, hydration throughout that time. And even on like a 45-minute run, if you can follow some of these principles, you're going to be able to perform better in that run too. You're going to be able to recover better. So I remember right there, I got two stories for you. One's a little longer and one's a short one. But the first one is when I was doing the 24-hour burpees, right? Because that was my first major challenge. I remember someone asked me, this nutrition scientist guy, he was a friend of a friend, and someone found out what I was doing and asked to give me a call to help me out. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Let's jump on the call. And the guy called me and he goes, what are you doing for nutrition? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, we were just going to have some gels and stuff, eat throughout the event. We didn't really think about it too much. And I remember just hearing his voice at the time, and basically without saying it, he said, you're a fucking idiot. And if it wasn't for him, there is no chance that I would have finished that 24-hour event. No chance at all. And he was explaining just general fundamentals about how many calories you should eat, how often you should eat, what type of calories you should put into your body. He introduced me to salt tablets, which at the time I was like, what the fuck are those? And now they're like, I eat them like candy. But if that is an example for me, like if I didn't have that guy, I would have been fucking stuffed. I would have had no chance. And I reckon I wouldn't have honestly made it past the 3-4 hour mark because of the heat and everything else that was going on. Like if it wasn't for him, I would have been stuffed. So hopefully this podcast is that guy's conversation to you. Now the second challenge, I remember this one, right? This was not lack of knowledge. This was lack of preparation. And I was doing a Spartan race, one of those like ultra races through, I don't even like the obstacle course ultra race, right? It's pretty grueling. It was up a mountain. I had no water out on me at all, and there was no real aid stations. I had no salt. I had no nutrition, and I was just in such a bad way because I was cramping every 10 seconds. And I remember I got about halfway through this event, and some guy saw me cramping on the side of the road, gave me all the fuel, gave me the salt tablets, the water, the gels. And as soon as I had all of that, it was like an instantaneous energy boost, and I was able to finish the race. And I reckon since then, I've never taken my nutrition lightly. Like, I've always prepared it well. And I'm going to go into now how to do this. And I'm going to run this a little bit more like an FAQ, and I'm going to answer the specific questions that you're probably going to have. So the first question is going to be, how much should I eat? Now, this is going to change depending on what you want to achieve, right? And how long it goes for, how grueling it is, heat. Those are always going to be factors in this conversation. Same thing about water, right? I'm going to say, how hot is it? How much are you sweating? How hard's the activity? And the reason this matters is if you think about it, a 24-hour walk compared to 24 hours of burpees. My heart rate on the walk is going to be like 110. The heart rate on my burpees is probably going to be 160 plus. So my expenditure of calories is going to be higher on one and higher on the other. So my need to consume calories is going to be higher on one and higher on another, right? In generally speaking here, 200 to 400 is a really, really good mark of calories. I tend to do something like this. I'll have like every hour I'll be having some type of snack around 200 to 400. So that would be like a banana, that would be a gel, that would be potato chips, it'd be maybe half a sandwich, whatever it is. But every hour I'm having something like that, and I know that I'm kind of hitting that bare minimum. And if that's like on a run, you can't obviously stomach a sandwich because it might not be viable for that race. You'll have something like a gel, and you'll have a gel every, 45 minutes. So I do it like every hour on the hour because it's easy to remember, but roughly that's what you're trying to do to replace glycogen, right? We're trying to keep carbohydrates in our muscles so we can use them as fuel. Now, what I like to do is I like to add something called like a breaker. This for me actually keeps me sane. But if I have, let's say, a 24-hour event, every 4 hours I do a meal. That way I'm trying to give myself a boost of extra calories. Now, regardless of the activity, I will still do this. So it might be something like gel, meal, gel, meal. It might be banana gel, banana meal, whatever it is, right? But I'm constantly thinking about eating more and more calories. Now, in terms of what calories you should be putting in your body, the simplest way to say it is carbs, and everyone already knows that, or a lot of the time people know that, but simple carbohydrates are great, but what you're doing in these physical challenges is you're constantly bringing you're playing with fire, right? Because the goal is as many calories as you can, because you're expending calories at a rate that you probably can't, compensate for. You need to just eat a lot of shit. Right? Now, when you eat a lot of shit, like especially high calorie carbohydrates, you kind of feel like shit. So you've got to be mindful of like your actual stomach and how your stomach's feeling. Because if you take your stomach to a point where you can't actually take in more nutrition, then you're also fucked, right? So how do you eat for long endurance nutrition? You've got to find a food program that works well for you. Now, I've got an iron gut. I can eat fucking anything as much as I can. It does not bother me. I still, after 17 hours, I might start to feel a little bit sick, but compared to some people, it's fine. So for you, you've got to find that simple carbohydrate system that works for you. Something like bananas and white bread are always good, but you've got to find that for yourself. So that's like a bit of an overview on food. So just to summarize, 200 to 400 calories every hour or so. And then I usually add a circuit breaker of one meal every 4 hours. And the reason I do that is just to give myself an influx of carbohydrates. I also find every 4 hours is usually the time where I have like a 2-3 minute rest depending on the challenge. Okay, water. What do we have in water? Now this one is a bit more specific to how hard you're working, right? Because with food, you can summarize it a little bit more, because you can't, even if you're doing shitloads of exercise, it's pretty hard to give yourself 1,000 calories an hour, even if that's what you actually need, right? But with water, you've got to be a little bit more strategic. So in general, you want to be aiming between that like 400 to 800 mil mark. So if you think about habit pairing this with your food, if you were to have like a gel, you would have, 250 mils of water, and then you would sip some water throughout that hour. So that way, every hour you have that meal or that snack, that cal fix, then you're pairing it up with some water at the time. So a glass of water, help it digest, and then you're sipping some water throughout that hour. That little principle right there will keep you hydrated. It's no point, people try and get very, very strategic with it, like, to the mill. It never works out that way. It goes out the window. So what I think actually is a more appropriate plan is to actually pair your like habits and food system together. So every time you have the snack, you have the water, and then you make a conscious effort to have a few, sips and glasses or cups of water as you're going through that challenge, right? Now, the next one is salt. So we've got our food, we've got our water, we're 70, 80% of the way there. If we're nailing just that alone, we are smashing it. And even if you don't feel like that, let's say you don't feel like having 800 mils of water, have 400 mils of water, right? If you don't feel like having, 400 calories of food, you have 200 calories of food. You can bring up and down the range based off heat, based off how hard you're working, but you do not break that schedule. If you break that schedule, it breaks you, right? You need to keep up of an eating and a nutrition schedule. Now, salt is crazy important. It's the least important out of the three, but it is still really important for long distance endurance events, especially when you have a high sweat amount. Like when you're sweating a lot and you're replacing your fluids, you're stripping your body of sodium, potassium, magnesium, you're stripping all of that, and you're gonna start getting cramps. Can't do the exercise, up shit creek. So how much salt you should have is dependent on things like how much you're sweating. Now, to dumb it down, to make it super simple, 1 to 2 tablets every hour. Bang. Wow, you've just got a whole science degree done. Like, you don't need to overcomplicate it. If you start cramping, you're probably gonna be needing more of that, like that too. If you're drinking shitloads of water and you're sweating heaps, you're probably closer to that too. I generally do 1 an hour no matter what if I'm sweating in general. So if it's a jog, I'm taking 1 no matter what every hour as a bare minimum, which means I'm gonna have 24 over the 24-hour period. This one can feel a bit gross. This one plays around with your stomach. You can get salt in other ways. You don't have to have salt tablets. You can have potato chips. You can have salty food. However, the reason I choose things like a banana, a water, and a salt tablet is I can control all 3 of those variables. I can control the quantities of them, and I'm very aware of how much I'm having of each of them, right? So you can go get sweat tests, and you can do all that stuff. However, out of all the things I've done, 24 hours, multiple 24-hour events, multiple running events, blah, 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 look at me, blah, blah, blah. But the point is out of all those things, I've never been stopped from nutrition, and I've always followed this protocol. Okay, so I'm gonna just fire off a couple of FAQs that I think the most commonly thing I do get asked is how do you break up your macronutrients? So carbs, proteins, and fats. I'm 80% carbs, 80 to 90% carbs. I still like to have a bit of protein. Honestly, from a sanity point of view, is it vital? Probably not. Fats, I do have fats. I'm a carb person though. I've always been carb tolerant, so I do prefer carbs. However, fats are still a viable source, and I think elements of small fats are great. Like a white bread sandwich with peanut butter and avocado, or like an avocado and Vegemite. I love those, but majority being carbohydrates. Also, just a tip here, I tried a pizza when I was doing a challenge, and I felt like absolute dog shit, obviously, but avoiding things that are really high in fats during a physical endurance event is a really good idea to avoid all that stuff. All right, next one. Do I need potassium and magnesium? Yes, you do, especially with high sweat, especially with high heat, things like that, or a really long event. Now, you can get supplements for it. However, I think the easiest way to do this, honestly, is just to have hydrolyte, and I just add that to my water. It doesn't have as high quantities of potassium and magnesium as what you could potentially get, yes, but is it going to be suitable enough paired with salt, your food, and water? Yes. So hydrolyte's a really easy fix to that. Can I mix water with sports drinks? Can you have carb sports drinks? Absolutely you can. This, once again, the longer the challenge, the less this protocol the more this protocol is likely to go out the window. So then it comes back down to those fundamentals at the start, which is eat a lot of food, drink a lot of water, get some shit into your body. I don't like to mix, in general though, when I start off a challenge, I don't like to mix water with sports drinks, only because I like to, once again, be able to keep track of these things really easily. And when you're having a sports drink, you start to blur the lines of carbohydrates and water. Do I have caffeine? Fuck yeah. Caffeine is the bomb. Caffeine, I like to dose it. Actually, you know what? I like to save it for when I feel like shit. That's just the simplest way of putting it. It's a personal preference to me. People talk about having like one no-do every hour. People talk about having it overnight to beat your circadian rhythm. For me, I hold off having caffeine as long as I can. And when I feel like shit, I have the caffeine because it changes your perception of pain. But that's a personal preference. Again, just don't overdo it. How do you manage stomach distress? Simple. You push the lines and the barriers of what you can take into your stomach until you feel like shit, and then you bring it down and you just hold slightly below shit as long as you possibly can. But keeping things with what I'm saying before, in all seriousness, keeping the system of like water, simple carbohydrates, avoiding fats, not overdoing salt, things like that will keep your stomach somewhat in line. But I can't relate to this one as well as probably what some other people could, because I have very good stomach capacity for this stuff. Okay, people talk about beetroot, and there's a lot of things out there that have been known to have long endurance positive effects. Do these things work? Yes, technically speaking, there's some truth in it, especially from I think they did a clinical study with beetroot and it did have some positive effects. However, this is like the 1%er. This is like when you say, I want to get good recovery, I'm going to have an ice bath instead of not getting 9 hours of sleep and not eating right? Like it's the 1%er, and it really doesn't matter. I've had beetroot once, things like that. I've done that once and I didn't notice a difference. How do you adjust your nutrition plan based on the distance and duration of the race? So this is actually quite a good question, right? Thanks, Ethan. I wrote it myself. But if you think about a marathon versus a 100K race, this is probably the easiest way to explain it. So in a marathon, on average, let's say it takes 4-ish hours. Let's just call it 4. Let's say an ultra race takes you 10, 12, right? If you were to not eat as well on a marathon, if you were to have 2 gels, whatever, and a salt tablet, you might make it still. This is the thing. You might be able to make it. And if you've trained well enough and you're not pushing yourself, it's a reasonably cold day, you could probably push through it. And you might hit the wall afterwards, but you might be okay. With an ultra, if you haven't done those nutrition practices and you haven't been clever with it, you can really put yourself in a pickle. You can get fucked up from it. So where does it change? I think it's the level of importance of actually sticking to it is what changes. Because if I was going to go for a 10K run, I might have some food before I go, but I'll be right. I'll have it I might not even have a glass of water. I might literally just run the whole thing and have a glass of water when I get back. But on a 24-hour event, I'm constantly thinking nutrition, even when I'm feeling fantastic, because it's a prevention mechanism rather than just curing it. And what the last question is, what do you eat prior to a challenge? Something that's not going to make you feel sick, something that is high in carbohydrates and reasonably good fats. It can be oats, it could be a smoothie. Smoothies tend to go through you quite quick, but I wouldn't change up your routine massively. Once again, this is the beetroot thing. Having a high carbohydrate meal is fine. Don't overcomplicate it. All right, that's nutrition. Hopefully you learned something from that. If you did ever have any questions with nutrition, feel free to shoot me a message and I can run you through my protocols. But if I want anything to take away from this, it's eating and having salt and drinking every hour. Find a protocol that suits that hour. Have a high range, have a low range, and work your way in between that every single hour until you finish, no matter what it is. Cool. Thank you for listening and watching. If you're watching on YouTube, if you could please share it, give it a like, whatever, share it with someone who might find it useful. That would be much appreciated. Thank you.